So, welcome to the CLAGS 2026 Fellows Showcase. We are here to celebrate emerging scholars and the work that'll be the next generation of LGBTQ scholarship. My name is Cassandra Sparks, and I'm guest faculty of sociology at Sarah Lawrence College. I'm the current scholar in residence at CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies at CUNY, and I also serve on the board. So, CLAGS is the first university-based LGBTQ research center in the United States. It's the first center to study the lives, ideas, texts, and cultures of LGBTQ people. And this year we are celebrating our 40th anniversary. We're just at the end of a year of recognizing that milestone. Some of the highlights include the Lesbian Lives Conference that happened in October, organized by Sinister Wisdom, and the Queer Class Relations Conference, which just happened about a month ago and convened an incredible group of scholars and activists and community thinkers for 2 days of panels and conversations. And tonight is a really special event for CLAGS because we get to celebrate some exceptional scholars. If you ever get a chance to kind of look through folks that have received these awards in the past, you can get a sense of the trajectory that these fellows and award recipients are on and their capacity to make a meaningful impact in queer studies, culture, and politics. And we at CLAGS are really excited to invite them into our orbit and our lineage. So with that said, let's get started. So you'll hear today from 7 of our 2026-2027 fellows and award recipients. They'll each speak about their work for a few minutes, and then we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions per person. To ask a question, you can post it in the chat or just raise your hand. So first up, we have Soheil Asefi, who is receiving the 2026-2027 CLAGS Research Archive Award. The CLAGS Research Fellowship provides $1,000 to support a scholar's use of the new publicly available CLAGS Research Archive, housed in the Graduate Center's Mina Reese Library for scholarly research in the field of LGBTQ studies. The CLAGS Research Archive collects the material history of the center from its founding in 1986 until now, including organizational files, publications, conference posters and programs, and other ephemera. Soheil Asefi is a PhD candidate in history at the CUNY Graduate Center, whose research focuses on queer anti-imperialism, class struggle, diaspora, revolution, and counter-revolution, and the global afterlives of 1979. An exiled Iranian journalist and former political prisoner, he holds an MA in political science from the New School for Social Research and was a writer in exile with the German Penn Center. He is a member of PEN America. His scholarship brings together historical materialist analysis and queer critique, grounded in extensive history and archival research in Iran, New York, and Berlin. His dissertation examines how revolutionary movements and queer political formations were reshaped by counter-revolution, incarceration, exile, and urban restructuring from the 1970s through the 1990s, with particular attention to prisons and political repression. He teaches contemporary European thought from a Global South perspective at Lehman College.
Thanks to Matt and the entire CLAGS team, especially for your rigorous work during this very unsettling time, very Gramscian moment, then the old is dying and the new cannot yet be born. So, I mean, thank you for all your work that you're doing. So without further ado, I just give you a quick overview of my project and especially regarding this award that I'm going to work on, the CLAGS archives. I use queerness not primarily as, that's the first one, sorry. I'm really honored to receive the CLAGS Archive Award, especially because CLAGS itself is part of the history I'm studying. My dissertation asks a simple but uncomfortable question. What if queer history did not move from repression to liberation, but from revolution to counter-revolution? And what if institutions like archives, nonprofits, and philanthropy played a central role in that shift? The next slide, I use queerness not primarily as identity, but as a way to track forms of intimacy, solidarity, and political attachment that become illegible or punishable under regime of power. This allows me to connect very different sides, New York City, Tehran, and West Berlin, or Berlin today, but my work is from 1979 to 1999, so, and mostly about West Berlin. I bring together oral histories, activists, firma, and institutional archives, including CLAGS and major philanthropic archives to see, what was this trajectory from militant activism and revolutionary forms to different forms of NGOization and other kinds of, forms of like organizing during this time frame. I argue that 1979 marks a global rupture, not just politically, but in everyday life. Revolutionary movement across the global south, that's the next slide, were defeated, contained, or redirected. At the same time, in places like New York, we see the consolidation of carceral governance, mass incarceration, policing, and austerity. What emerges is not simply repression, but a reorganization of life, of care, desire, and survival. As you can see in this slide, you see this is a very much 1979 moment. You see Nicaragua, these are the Persian translation, German translation of this work. My work is a very transnational, global history. So this is the moment of 1979 Sandinista. Then we have Grenada, Maurice Bishop, we have Iranian Revolution, we have the Turkish 1980s military coup in Turkey, and a lot of other events. So I'm actively thinking of revolution and counter-revolution, and queerness is a method to think of the question of intimacy, what happened to this and what remains. So to get into the question of CLAGS as archive of transition, working with CLAGS archives allows me to trace how queer scholarship and activism were institutionalized over time. What's striking is that CLAGS materials preserve both radical anti-racist and anti-capitalist currents and their gradual displacement. We see a shift from revolutionary solidarities, third worldism, anti-imperialism, to frameworks centered on identity, recognition, and professionalization. So CLAGS is not just an archive of queer history, it is part of the history of how that shift took place. The next slide. In the Ford and Rockefeller archives, I examine how sexuality became a category of governance through funding. During the AIDS crisis, community responses were materially necessary, but they were also reshaped through philanthropic structures. What begins as survival becomes managed, measured, and professionalized. Care becomes a site of control as well as survival. So what is this dialectic between the question of survival, the necessity of organize our social life, and the role of funding, the role of these institutions? The next slide. In the next slide, we're going to this development in West Berlin and New York. As you can see in the slides, there are like some primary sources. In New York, organizations that once aligned with anti-imperialist struggles, Black liberation, Puerto Rican movement, Third World solidarity, become increasingly entangled with carceral governance, nonprofit infrastructures, especially during the AIDS crisis. What emerges is not simply support, but a system where survival is mediated through funding, institutions, and eligibility. In West Berlin, I trace a parallel shift. Anti-imperialist, feminist, and queer solidarity, often deeply connected to struggles in Iran, Turkey, and the global South, gradually gives way to a liberal politics of recognition centered on the German state. Migrant and exilic subjects remain present, but increasingly marginalized within these narratives. Across both sides, queer politics does not simply become more visible, it becomes reorganized. What I call managed survival emerges, a condition where institutions are necessary for life, but structures and limit what kinds of politics are possible. These systems produce the conditions of survival while narrowing the horizon of political imagination. So the question of revolution and counter-revolution, if the 1979 was like the moment of this global, at least global South, question of revolution and counter-revolution, it was like gradually, goes away. Or, I mean, what remains? That's the question of my dissertation. What remains in the two imperial core cities like West Berlin and New York? The last slide, which I ended with this beautiful work of the queer Iranian American artist in New York who passed away a few years ago, Ardeshir Mohasses. That's about what's at stake in this project, is how we write queer history. Instead of a story of progress from repression to liberation, I argue for a different trajectory, from revolutionary possibility to managed survival. This requires decentering the US and Western Europe, not by ignoring them, but by situating them within a global field shaped by 1979 and its aftermath. New York and Berlin are not origins of queer politics here. So, I mean, what I'm doing is not just post-Stonewall things. So I'm trying to see if we shift this mainstream Euro-American centric history that's about post-Stonewall to 1979, what we can see, what remains, what not, what stays there. That's the whole historiographical intervention. There are sites where global counter-revolution is reorganized. It also means rethinking institutions, archives, nonprofits, philanthropy, not simply as spaces of preservation of or care, but as active participants in shaping what counts as queer history. So the question is not only how we preserve queer histories, but how we confront the conditions that have limited them, and how we might recover forms of solidarity that exceed those limits. Thank you. What I call managed survival emerges a condition where institutions are necessary for life, but a structure and limit what kinds of politics are possible. These systems produce the conditions of survival while narrowing the horizon of political imagination. So these are like a very short overview of my project, and I'm very happy to answer any questions in Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. I would like to know if anyone has any questions. And you can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. Well, if there's no questions at the moment, would you mind, elaborating more about what you're planning to do with the archive specific ephemera or materials you're looking forward to working with?
Sure. I mean, I gave you this overview. It's like the project is like it's transnational history is hard. How to the question of method. I still actively thinking of. I'm trying to just to see to polish this dissertation and getting ready for my manuscript now. So the archive, the question of mobility is a big thing now, as I mentioned. That's the reality when we're trying to get out of the borders of empire and coming back. The whole question of archive is part and parcel of our, the reality of our everyday survival. So, I'm still actively working both in West Berlin and in New York in different archival, resources. But the work is almost done. And there are these the first chapter is about 1979 moment where I try to start from the prisoners' letters, from the last words of the people who were part and parcel of who fought that. They were not victims, but the revolutionaries who were eliminated, physically eliminated in these peripheries, and to reread as a queer Marxist reading of their last words. So then we go to the global 1979. I give like an overview of all these spaces. And the second chapter, we go to West Berlin to see what is going on. This is the Cold War West Berlin. So this is beyond us just Berlin as a gay mecca and subculture. So this is not at my point of departure yet again is 1979, how it was reflected in West Berlin. And the next site is New York City, so what was this post 1979? What remains from this like queer anti-imperialism in the city, and how these people organize, how the people who are completely in the margin of this current mainstream historiography. So there are a lot of oral history interviews, a lot of archival work, and then I get into the poetics and politics of exile. We talk about South Bronx, we talk about Lower Manhattan, we talk about all these little sites that are completely in the periphery of the center, even when it comes to New York City. And then the last chapter is about incarceration. So I start with prison. Incarceration is a big part of my work. I mean, and then we ended this work with I ended this work with the mass graves of Iranian communists in the 1988, and I'm rereading these mass graves through a queer method to see what remains, what happens to the question of intimacy, what happens to the question of collective here. So yeah, I mean, I'm ready to. I know it's like this work, I mean, it may need a lot of explanations, but I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, this is amazing. We have to keep going with the showcase, but thank you so much for sharing your work. And it's great to see how many of you are working with archives in different capacities. It's really exciting. So next up, I want to introduce Andrés Mendieta, who is the 2026-2027 recipient of the Duberman-Zal Award. The Duberman-Zal Award is a $3,000 endowed fellowship named for the CLAGS founder and first executive director Martin Duberman and partner Eli Zal. This fellowship is awarded to a graduate student, an independent scholar, or an adjunct from any country doing scholarly research on the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer experience. Andrés Mendieta is a PhD candidate in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and a Mellon Cluster Fellow in the Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Northwestern University. He is also the co-director of the Trans Masculinities Archive of Argentina and Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellow 2026. Andres, want to get started?
Thank you so much for this presentation, Kassandra, and for having me today. I'm truly honored to receive the Duberman-Zal Fellowship and also to have the opportunity to share some insights about my research with you all and having this conversation. Could you, next slide, please? I would like to start with a short quote that is central to my work for many reasons. One of the most important reasons is how difficult it is to find first-person voices of transmasculinities in the past. And this quote is particularly significant because it is deeply contestatory. If the editors of La Tribuna have any doubts about my sex, I'm staying at the Ancla Dorada Hotel, where they may verify what it is. With these words, Carlos Lambra, a prolific trans piano professor, the one we are seeing on my screen, who emigrated to Buenos Aires from the UK, closed a letter published in 1862 responding to a newspaper, La Tribuna, that had publicly questioned his true sex. I begin with this quote because, as I said, this moment captures something central to my work. Transmasculine lives have not only been scrutinized, they have also negotiated, resisted, and asserted themselves in public. Over the past 4 years, I have worked across national libraries, archives, and private collections, examining newspapers, literature, photography, memoirs, and letters. Sources often dismissed as anecdotal or lowbrow. For instance, I can point the work we do with the Transmasculine Memory Archive. We mainly work with materials from the past, revisiting images and stories, also pushing back against something that is very widespread, that masculinities are invisible. But as the activist Mauro Cabral says, what they call the invisibility of transmasculinities is actually erasure. That invisibility is not an optical phenomenon, he said. It is a political phenomenon, and that is also what my research is about. The fact that we were silenced, that does not mean that we didn't exist. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the Transmasculine Memory Archive, the work that we are currently doing. Next slide, please. Okay. I want to highlight the power of the archives, but also the photographs, because to me, photographs help us think about the past. As you can see on my screen, they show how trans people present themselves, but they also help us intervene in the present and imagine the future. When there are no first-person voices like Carlos, whom I quoted at the beginning, photographs became an especially interesting resource, as that's the way we can use them today. Next slide, please. For example, the Transmasculine Memory Archive of Paraguay during the most recent Pride March in Paraguay used a photograph of Manuel Villalba, who was also a trans soldier from the early 20th century in Paraguay. His famous phrase was, when he was asked his name, he said, Manuel. They asked him again, no, I'm asking for your real name. And he replied, my name is Manuel. I don't have another name. So the Transmasculine Memory Archive of Paraguay as a performance filled the streets of Paraguay with images of Manuel. They passed photographs of Manuel all across the street of Asunción with the phrase, the only name that they have is Manuel. So as you can see, transmasculine, my project is about the past because I'm working in the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. But it is also a bridge to the present, a time when conservative movements are actively working to erase trans lives. My work sustains trans presence and resistance. Thank you.
Amazing. Andres, thank you so much for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions on Andres' work? If not, I'd be curious to hear if there's anything you're hoping to focus on, like what is the next step of your work that you'll be working on while a Duberman-Zal fellow?
Thank you for your question, Cassandra. This year, I'm planning to focus on my dissertation writing, but also I'm planning to travel to Paraguay and Brazil in order to do some archival work and also to continue my work with trans memory archives. So I'm so excited about this. Thank you so much for this question and for organizing this fantastic event.
Amazing. I cannot wait to see where your work goes and get the update at the end of this year. Um, are there any other questions? And if not, we will move on to our next fellow. All right. Thank you so much, Andres. Next, we have A.W. Strouse, the 2026-2027 recipient of the CLAGS Fellowship. The CLAGS Fellowship is a $2,000 award to be given annually for a graduate student, an academic, or an independent scholar for work on a dissertation, a first book manuscript, or a second book manuscript. The CLAGS Fellowship is open to intellectuals contributing to the field of LGBTQ studies. Intended to give the scholar the most help possible in furthering their work, the fellowship is used for research, travel, and writing support. A.W. Strouse has written several books, including Form and Foreskin and The Gentrified City of God. In 2020, Strouse started cruising in Mexico City's subway system, working on their current book project, Mexico's Queer Underground, Sex, Trains, and the State, which is under contract with Duke. Since the metro opened in 1969, the subway has served as an erogenous zone full of cruising, community, and activism. In uncovering the subterranean history, Strouse theorizes how states use infrastructure to fuck populations. AW, can you take it away?
Thank you so much, Cassandra, and thanks to everyone at CLAGS and to my colleagues for their presentations and to all of you for being here. And thanks, as always, to CUNY. So I'm going to read a couple of pages from the intro to my book. The intro is called "This Train is Bound for Glory Holes." Next slide, please. Across the crowded train, that buff guy with the tattoo around his throat keeps glaring like he wants to strangle me. His fist grips the handrail. His bicep pumps. But I just glare right back and picture him naked. Suddenly he smiles and approaches and whispers, "Hola, ¿de dónde eres?" The train pulls into the station, giving me no time to explain. I spent most of my life running away from where I'm from, and now, thousands of miles away, I finally found my people in Mexico City's metro, where guys cruise in el último vagón. The guy with the throat tat already waves adios from the platform. The train takes off. In the last car, I've enjoyed countless quick combos and furtive trysts and made a few friends. But above all, I consider the metro my one true love. Next slide. The metro opened its first line in 1969, added two more in 1970, and then expanded to stretch across Mexico City with 12 lines that convey 4.5 million passengers per day. Its sleek style, mixing modernist internationalism with Mexican motifs, evokes, for me, the retro utopian visions of Star Trek and the UN headquarters, but with more hardcore gay sex. The intensity varies throughout the day. At rush hour, dozens of bodies pack into the last car in a dry humping mass. Lots of masturbation, occasionally oral. Just before the metro closes at midnight, 3 or 4 guys form a circle jerk in a desolate car. Next slide, please. The last car, like a muse, inspires poetry, paintings, pop songs, peer-reviewed papers, and porn. Copycats in other cities mimic the last car. And a few blocks from the president's palace, one sex club features a replica of the wagon. Some say, though not everyone agrees, that each metro line serves a different taste. Line 3 terminates at the National University, so in the last car of Line 3, you can usually find a bunch of undergrads using their satchels like shields to hide their antics. Line 9 passes through the sports center, so the last car of Line 9 carries teams of jocks. Supposedly, Line B proffers the most refined pleasures for libertines with sophisticated palates. Line B runs through the city's most disreputable barrios. According to La Siguamanta, a queer podcaster, this line draws together distinct sexual geographies, traversing between the tame city center and the kinkier periphery. As La Siguamanta says, dandies like to ride on the metro, hunting for the guys known as chacales. Next slide, please. In the last car, I've met rakes who lust after chacales, but I've met very few self-proclaimed chacales. I know many woke moralists who would cancel the term chacal altogether. The word, problematically fetishizing, typically refers to working-class, darker-skinned, muscular men. By reputation, the chacal leads a double life, closeted or gay for pay. Stereotypically, the chacal allows his admirers to gaze upon him, but he averts his eyes or he puffs out his chest and stares angrily. Allegedly, the chacal roughly fucks, then steals from his more affluent Johns. The John, in turn, relishes in the abuse as part of a fantasy of playing the civilizing savior to a noble savage. In my writing, I used the English word jackal to translate chacal and his counterparts, the chichifo and mayate, to signal some critical distance. Trafficking in jackals, the metro enables queer relations across social divides. Ultimately, my own escapades in the last car will make up just a small part of the larger story that I'm going to tell. Throughout my book, I humbly tried to recover the metro's queer history from its planning phases to the present day. And through my interpretation of that history, I develop a theory about the queerness of infrastructure, what I'm going to call jackalization after the jackal. And then my intro talks about research methods and archives, my theory of the jackal and the historiography. I'd love to take questions about those things. For now, I will summarize the history of the metro as I relate it. Next slide, please. So first, I situate the birth of the metro in the context of the 1968 massacre of Tlatelolco, when Mexico's ruling party, known as the PRI, murdered hundreds of student activists. There's a persistent urban legend that disappeared bodies were buried in the foundations of the metro, and President Gustavo Diaz Ordaz, the patron of the metro, became popularly known as the Jackal of Tlatelolco. Members of the party in collusion with industrialists planned the metro through a web of duplicitous male-male alliances tinged by homophobia and homoeroticism. To cover their homosocial anxiety, they spread the rumor that the metro was a wedding gift for the film star Maria Felix. And Salvador Novo, a dandy who fetishized rough trade, wrote the first official chronicle of the metro, in which he said that the subway penetrated the city's bowels. Next slide. Next, I track the history of the metro in its first decade of operation, showing how government corruption caused intense overcrowding, which led to male-male intimacy in an overpacked metro. Famously, Jose Joaquin Blanco complained that the metro destroyed the elite gay enclave of the Zona Rosa by flooding it with jackals. I also found some Marxist critiques of the metro claiming that it corrupted proletarian sexuality by exposing workers to the decadence of the Zona Rosa and bourgeois gays who lived there. And I argued that the metro became a panopticon of delinquency and entrapment that also enabled the emerging gay rights movement. Next slide, please. In my third chapter, I tried to recover the queer history of the station of Hidalgo in the 80s and 90s, when Hidalgo became the epicenter of gay life in the city. As the Mexican state neoliberalized, its policies allowed Hidalgo to become a base for lumpen street kids called chavos, who congregated in the station and formed the largest HIV/AIDS activism group of the time, which was mostly erased from the historical record. Next slide, please. And then in my final chapter, I investigate how the last car formed under the democratization of the Mexican state, beginning in the early 2000s, when people were evicted from the queer communities that had formed in the stations and pushed into the last car. And final slide, please. So I tried to theorize this history through the figure of the jackal. And I will leave it there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, AW. Does anyone have any questions? Well, if not, I would love to take you up on your offer, to share a little bit more about your archival and research methods.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of dissonance in descriptions of the metro. It's kind of an open secret in a closet, and it's quite challenging to find materials. I began by trying to do an oral history by interviewing people who I met in the last car. I interviewed 35 people, and I learned a lot about the contemporary scene. I struggled to meet older people who could tell me about the longer term history. Later, I discovered why, which was that so many people had passed away very young during the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s. In the archives, there's a persistent government corruption under the regime, which has caused the archives to be inaccessible. They're just now being made transparent. And the National Archives is housed in a former panopticon penitentiary, which had been used to sexually torture people and to imprison sexual dissidents. So the experience of going to the archives was quite troubling, and the National Archives didn't really contain anything, or actually does contain a lot, but that is not accessible. I was able to find some really interesting newspaper articles which showed how people began to appropriate the metro really early on for what I consider to be queer and trans activism. Stories about trans women being extorted by police, being arrested in the station of Hidalgo. And I also had to rely on music, pop songs, paintings, literature, poetry, trying to piece together a history that has been hidden for a lot of different reasons. Because of government corruption, and also because of the closeted status of this system.
Thank you for sharing. That is so interesting. I really look forward to hearing more about your work. Um, PJ, we can take a very quick question and then we can move on.
Great, thank you. Thank you, AW. I have a question about that subsection that you call turning Raza pink or turning the Raza pink. And I was wondering if it's connected to thinking about the what you call the Chacal formation to specific racialized group, and then to either gentrification or is some type of homonationalism that you're linking to pinkwashing or something like that. But I don't know. I just want to know where the term Razak, where does it come from, and whether it comes from those oral histories that you had collected. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
for
for your
your
question.
beautiful, beautiful presentation.
Thank you so much for your question. So, yeah, part of my argument is that the metro is imposed with this homo nationalist agenda, the government trying to consume the bodies of working class men and make them available to capital. And I call this process of redeveloping the urban terrain jackalization, the desire of the state to consume the working class body. The line about the Raza specifically comes from a chronicle by Jose Joaquin Blanco. Blanco complained that the jackals destroyed the Zona Rosa. Later in his career, a decade later, he recognized that the Metro had actually made gay liberation possible, and he said that the Metro painted the Raza pink. It made the homo national body queer by allowing working class people and bourgeois gays to come together through this transportation system that turned the whole city, the whole Raza, he said, pink.
Amazing. Thank you so much, AW, for your work, and we look forward to seeing where this work takes you,
Thanks.
and seeing the book when it comes out. All right, so next up, we have Matthew Knip, the 2026-2027 recipient of the Paul Monette-Horowitz Dissertation Prize. The Paul Monette-Horowitz Dissertation Prize is a $1,000 award which honors the memories of Monette, a poet and author, and his partner Horowitz, an attorney, and will be given to the best dissertation in LGBTQ studies, broadly defined, by a PhD candidate within the City University of New York system. Matthew Knip is an adjunct professor of English at Hunter College. His work has appeared in ESQ, a journal of 19th century American literature and culture, and Leviathan, a journal of Melville studies. His ESQ essay won the Melville Society's 2017 Henning Cohen Prize for the best article, book chapter, or essay in a book about Herman Melville. Matthew spent 2025 revising this dissertation before Melville's Masts, Sex in the Age of Snail, into a book now titled Sailor Intimacies and the Enclosure of the Erotic Commons, currently under consideration at Cambridge University Press. Matthew.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much to CLAGS for this honor, and thank you to these everybody who's here today and these phenomenal presentations we're hearing. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be in a space that has so profoundly shaped how we think about the history of sexuality. My dissertation project, the project that this award recognizes, began as an archival study of maritime intimacy aimed at reconstructing the sociosexual world Melville inhabited and documented. The project, now a book under consideration at Cambridge, has become an argument about how desire moved before desire became something one could be. I began from the familiar question, how do we read same-sex desire in the past? But rather than asking who desires whom, I've come to ask a different question altogether. How does desire move? What happens if we shift our focus from identity to circulation, from subjects to the conditions under which intimacy becomes possible, perceptible, or simply lived? This question emerges from a tension in queer historiography. On the one hand, we have a model of recovery, the effort to locate recognizable sexual subjects in the archive. On the other, a skepticism about whether such recovery is even possible. My project tries to move through that impasse by asking a different question. Not what identities we can recover, but what forms of relation we can describe. To do that, I turn to 19th century maritime life, a world defined by enclosure, labor, and sustained bodily proximity. Ships were not just settings, they were environments that organized sensation, relation, and contact. And within those environments, I argue, desire often operated not as private identity, but as something more diffuse, ambient, collective, and situational. My central archive is the journals of Philip C. Van Buskirk. What these journals offer is not simply evidence of same-sex activity, although there is mountains of that, but a dense world of tactile relation, men sleeping side by side, sharing bunks, touching, joking, forming what sailors called chicken ship relationships. Sailors bathed together, labored in close physical coordination, slept in tightly packed forecastles, and moved through worlds in which privacy, as we would understand it, scarcely existed. What is striking in this archive is not just that these relations existed, it's how they were lived. They are not consistently marked as deviant. They are not coherently organized as identity. They are often not even fully articulated. They appear instead as part of the ordinary fabric of shipboard life. In this archive, intimacy is not hidden, it is ambient. To describe this, I develop a set of linked concepts. First is ambient desire. Desire not as something one has, but as something that moves, circulates across bodies and spaces, felt as atmosphere rather than identity. Second, the erotic commons, a shared, non-proprietary field in which touch, proximity, and intimacy circulate as part of collective life, unevenly, but publicly. And third, wet phenomenology, a way of naming the sensory conditions of maritime existence, the motion, the dampness, the exposure that shape how bodies encountered one another. Taken together, these concepts shift our analytic from interiority to environment, from who desires to how desire is made possible. Reading Herman Melville alongside Van Buskirk, I argue that Melville does not invent these intimacies. He transposes them. He takes forms of relation that are lived, embodied, and often inarticulate, and renders them as literary knowledge. In scenes like Ishmael and Queequeg's shared bed, or the famous squeeze of the hand, desire does not appear as identity. It appears as something that emerges through contact, through labor, through proximity, through the mingling of bodies in a saturated world. Desire here is not confessed, it is encountered. What Melville develops, I argue, is an epistemology of intimacy, grounded not in interior truth, but in atmosphere, touch, and relation, a wet epistemology. He preserves the density and indeterminacy of these encounters without resolving them into categories that later come to organize sexuality. The stakes of this are both historical and conceptual. First, it suggests that sexuality does not simply have a history of changing identities. It has a history of changing conditions of relationality. And second, it asks us to consider what is lost when intimacy becomes increasingly privatized, individuated, and legible only through identity. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we begin to see the consolidation of sexual taxonomies alongside new regimes of sexual surveillance and regulation. What had once functioned, however unevenly, as a more diffuse and partially public field of intimacy becomes narrowed, enclosed, and subject to classification. What disappears is not simply a set of acts. What disappears is a shared field of intimacy, a way of being in relation. My project argues that modern sexuality emerged not only through the naming of identities, but through the enclosure of more collective and non-proprietary forms of intimacy. To return then to my opening question, if we ask not who desires, but how desire moves, we begin to see that intimacy itself has a history, not only in its objects, but in its forms, its conditions, and its modes of circulation. And attending to that history helps illuminate how contemporary regimes of identity and proprietary continue to shape whose desires become publicly livable. And the 19th century ship offers us a powerful glimpse of a world in which desire had not yet been fully captured by the logics of sexual identity, a world in which other ways of being together were not only imaginable, but lived. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, we are running a bit behind. So, Matthew, if we have time at the end, folks can think and muse on questions they might have, and we can get back to you then. But for now, thank you so much for your presentation and for this work. I'm so excited to see this book when it comes out, and we can move on to our next fellow.
Thank you, Kassandra.
So next we have PJ DiPietro, the 2026 to 2027 recipient of the Sylvia Rivera Award in Transgender Studies. The Sylvia Rivera Award is a $1,000 award that honors the memory of Rivera, a transgender activist. The award is given for the best book or article to appear in transgender studies this past year. Dr. P.J. DiPietro works as a scholar activist at the intersection of philosophy, anthropology, and human geography. They are an associate professor of women and gender studies at Syracuse University, focusing on submerged systems of knowledge about nonconforming bodily projects across the Americas. Recipient of a Tinker Foundation Scholarship and an Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellowship, they are co-editor of Speaking Face to Face and Trans Philosophy, and author of Sideways Selves. They serve as one of the general editors of TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, and principal investigator for the multi-institution initiative, Trans Diasporic. PJ, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Kassandra. My gratitude to the fellow award recipients for your generosity sharing the wonderful work that you have been doing or are planning to do. And my gratitude to CLAGS for this recognition for Sideways Selves. I would like to begin, however, by extending this recognition to the communities that make this book possible. I wrote Sideways Selves because I needed a language, or I guess it needed a language that did not yet exist. Next slide, please. Sideways Selves intervene in trans studies, American studies, and comparative race studies by weaving together Latin American travesti theorizing and US-based Joteria studies to take on the work of fostering hemispheric solidarities. Sideways Selves give orientation to resistance beyond counter-hegemony and opposition. They point to post-oppositional meaning-making and craft liminal standpoints that counter-publics cannot fully account for. Next. I spent years in conversation with travesti communities in and around Buenos Aires, Argentina, and the Northwest, Jujuy, and with Joteria communities, queer, non-binary, and trans, Afro-Latinx and Latinx artists, performers, and migrants in the San Francisco Bay Area. What I witnessed in both places could not be captured by existing systems of critical knowledge. These communities did something different, and that something unfolded sideways. Next, Two concepts developed within these communities illuminate this orientation, sideways orientation. In travesti communities, this orientation is named transversalidad. As the late activist Loana Berkins explained, transversalidad traverses the social fabric sideways rather than by seeking rehabilitation into mainstream or minoritized identities or politics. Transversalidad builds coalitions with picketeers, street vendors, human rights activists, and other sex workers. While refusing assimilation, it engages an affective body-to-body invocation of dissidence. In Joteria communities, a kindred mode is named nostredad, roughly usness or we-ness. Travesti activist Marlene Guayar explains that gender dissidents who migrate within and across Latinx diasporas have turned to Nostredad to name the dispersed yet enduring sociality that street walking and migration generate. Nostredad is outward looking. It places precarious subjectivities within the decolonial endeavors, summoning dissident bodily projects across hemispheric webs of care and political sovereignty and determination or self-determination. These concepts emerge from conditions of extreme vulnerability, specifically through histories that configured an economy of bodily responsiveness, differentiating between the human and not human, or what Maria Lugones called the colonial modern gender system. It is from within, but also beyond this system, that travesti and joteria communities give rise to expansive epistemology and political praxis. Next, please. To make philosophical sense of how travesti and joteria bodily projects respond to colonial legacies socially and organically, that is, as sociosomatic entanglements, I developed a tripartite schema inspired by debates about fugitivity and new materialisms. Capital G gender, as you see here in the slide, right, from left to right. Capital G gender refers to entanglements that ongoingly rehabilitate bodily projects to serve the white supremacist purpose of the nuclear family. It places negatively racialized bodies like Latinx and transmigrants bodies at a crossroads, pressing us into becoming legible as men and women, as aptly fitting the nuclear family. I employ, you see now in the center, lowercase, italicized, and in plural genders to highlight that some responses to the pressure exerted by capital G gender stem from negatively racialized subjectivities that internalize, however, partially and precariously, white supremacist and ableist bodily configurations. This is often a survival strategy, but it comes at a cost. The third register, which I call between quotation marks genders, and this is the realm of sideways selves, are responses that colonial frameworks cannot absorb, name, or erase. Bodily projects that co-produce neither human nor animal embodiments existing both outside and beneath the nuclear family, where versions of quote-unquote not gender sprout within the dark side of the colonial modern gender system. The quotation marks are meant to enact epistemic humility, signaling the tearing of the regime of species stagnation and holding open space for submerged indigenous and Afro-diasporic possibilities. Next, in their inhabitation of flesh, sideways selves invites us to sense and know the world otherwise. These further concepts in the book map this invitation. Loísmo, a grammatical practice in Andean Spanish long dismissed as an error, reveals how language itself can unlisten to colonial capital G gender and recalibrate sacred and posthuman arrangements of life. Hallucinating Knowing names the multisensory, more than human consciousness that Afro-Latinx and Latinx communities develop through performance and collective narrative, a healing mode of perception forged against displacement and racializing subjugation. Finally, Joteria Poetics creates a diasporic method of perception and communication, sonic, affective, geophysical, and intergenerational, that moves through broken tongues, dissonant harmonies, and embodied resonances to build coalitional politics across the hemisphere. Together, these three practices, Loísmo, hallucinated knowing, and Joteria Poetics, show that unfolding sideways is not only a bodily or political act, it is a way of knowing and intellectual history that dominant frameworks have not yet learned to hear. Next and last. A transgender bodily project might have arrived at a Eurocenter station that, rather than deflating capital G gender, boost its ableist spring. Transgender may carry Eurocentric, human, accruing assumptions about personhood, embodiment, and recognition. This book does not ask trans studies to add more cases such as travesti and joteria to its existing frameworks. It asks instead whether the field can relinquish its attachment to a colonial language long enough to register sideways ontologies of flesh, relation, and word making. Thank you.
PJ, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I cannot wait to read that text. We are moving a bit behind, so I'm going to hold on questions for now. But if we have time for questions at the end, please hold on to them and you can ask them to PJ then, or you can put them in the chat. Thank you so much, PJ. So we're going to move on to our next fellow. Next up, we have Foley, the 2026-2027 recipient of the Undergraduate Student Paper Award. Each year, CLAGS sponsors a student paper competition open to all undergraduate students enrolled in the CUNY system. An award is awarded to the best paper written in a CUNY undergraduate class on any topic related to gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, or transgender experiences. Rose Foley is a poet and educator who recently graduated with their bachelor's degree in English with honors from Hunter's College. While at Hunter, they conducted research on queer archival methods at Stanford University through the Stanford Hunter Summer Program. As an aspiring scholar of English literature, they studied innovative American poetry from the 20th and 21st centuries. They are particularly interested in the potential of non-traditional uses of language and poetic form within innovative poetics to convey minoritarian ideas, beliefs, and identities. Rose will be starting the MA program in Literature, Language, and Theory at Hunter College in fall 2026 and is ecstatic to be returning to their alma mater to do what makes their heart beat. Thank you so much, and Rose, you can take it away.
Okay, I'm realizing that was like kind of trite, that last sentence, but I was like, oh, that's true. So I'll put it in there. Yeah, I'm kind of along with the rest of the fellows and award recipients. I'm very grateful to be here. Um, I'm presenting on the paper that won this award is titled Semantic Disintegration and Disunderstanding: How Ava Hoffman's use of visual poetic forms expands the trans imagination in A Woman Wandered into a Thicket. The I wrote this paper the image you see on screen is the only image I will have because it's so beautiful to look at, I think. Um, is the visual poem by poet Ava Hoffman titled, but it's kind of untitled, as you can see. It's, bracketed "A woman watered into a thicket" because that's the most visible and like kind of identifiable first line of the poem. I was I wrote this paper in Professor Amy Robbins's English honors seminar at Hunter on innovative American poetics. And while this poet we did not study, I was in the class, I was very set on writing about her for my paper because I, my background in kind of through like the Stanford Hunter Summer Program in kind of archival um studying like kind of archival studies kind of has influenced me a lot in how I think about genre and specifically the genre of trans poetry. I was very kind of in my research for this paper I kind of found Cameron Awkward-Rich's article titled "Looking for Polly Murray's Trans Poetics," wherein he talks about the autobiographical narrative of transition, which is kind of the dominant literary form, or like the dominant literary form kind of in maybe trans writing or trans literature, which is this kind of coherent and like coherent and kind of resolved narrative of transition and transness. I I find that a really interesting topic and kind of kind of saddening because it is just this fact, because I think that is has rung true, or has rang true in my own kind of reading for leisure, like of trans kind of narratives of transition, etc. But Ava Hoffman is a visual poet, and her she wrote this piece of experimental critical theory that is also in visual format called Trapoetics Manifesto, which is a vision of trans poetry that kind of defies this, what Awkward-Rich terms the autobiographical narrative of transition. Um, Her theory of Trapoetics kind of centers around this kind of concept of disunderstanding, which is the process of engaging with transness without trying to comprehend it. It occurs when trans art challenges cis audiences to imagine the possibilities of transness without understanding them. I found kind of somehow I wrote my entire paper on this one poem. I mean, maybe it's not that hard to conceive of, but um, I was very kind of interested in what I, called this idea of semantic disintegration, where we have like kind of as the words and the lines of poetry kind of coil in on themselves and the font size decreases, we have the semantic dissolve into the or disintegrate into the visual. So we have this one idea or this one kind of what's the word, like mode of understanding. We have to use our kind of tools for understanding the semantic. Those kind of become obsolete as the poem turns visual. And I found that a really kind of what I write about in my paper is that this specific idea of semantic disintegration really does a wonderful job of kind of supporting or provoking disunderstanding in a reader, because it kind of imitates the idea of disunderstanding in that it kind of stages, you know it's uninterpretable what you see. It kind of eventually becomes uninterpretable and unreadable, and you were kind of forced as a reader kind of to engage with the poem without using traditional modes of understanding, such as interpretation, or like kind of, what we're taught close reading. And I was kind of thinking a lot about that in my paper, about how that is kind of this wonderful, kind of like this poem enacts exactly what Hoffman describes in her manifesto. And I was kind of landed on this idea that visual poetry specifically has this like kind of unique capacity to employ Ava Hoffman's trap poetics because it muddles genre and discipline. And it's not necessarily that I'm kind of against the autobiographical narrative transition. Yeah, kind of just thinking of it as an alternative. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose, for that presentation and sharing that poem with us. We are nearing the end, so if anyone has any questions, keep them in your mind. We might have time at the end for some questions for Rose and for our other fellows. So, lastly, I would love to introduce Adele Patrick, who is the 2026-2027 Scholar in Residence. So the CLAGS Scholar in Residence Fellowship assists scholars and professionals whose research on the LGBTQ experience can benefit from access to CLAGS resources and location in Midtown Manhattan at the CUNY Graduate Center. The fellowship is designed to encourage research and writing on the history, literature, and culture of the LGBTQ community or other dynamic projects relating to the LGBTQ experience, broadly conceived, to promote and facilitate interaction among the participants, including fellows funded by other sources, to facilitate the dissemination of the researchers' findings through lectures via CLAGS's ongoing event series, like this one. Adele Patrick is a co-founder and co-director of the Glasgow Women's Library, and has had a leadership role in this change-making organization, home for 30 years to the UK's National Lesbian Archive since 1991. Trained as a designer at Glasgow's School of Art, she has collaborated throughout her career with creatives locally and internationally. In 2016, Adele gained honorary doctorates from GSA and from Strathclyde University and became Scotswoman of the Year. Following a CLOR Leadership Fellowship, her research has focused on feminist leadership. CLAGS is currently hosting her Royal Society of Edinburgh Award, sponsored by the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And with that, we'd love to hear from you, Adele.
Thank you so much, Kassandra, and it really is a privilege and a pleasure to be in this gathering and to have heard quite remarkable contributions from fellows today. And I really love the idea of this idea of, and feel very honoured to be part of this lineage that Kassandra sort of mentioned in her introduction. So I just wanted to sort of like bookend really this short presentation with a memory of arriving in New York in the early 1990s and attending. It's incredibly exciting to attend one of the first Lesbian Avengers meetings on that visit. And it was also, I think, my first visit to the Lesbian Her Story archives. And that was at a time when the archives was in its inaugural year in its Brooklyn home. But I'd also got a memory of hearing that the archive had originally been in the home of Joan Nessel and Deb Adele. So these were really formative sort of visits. I took the toolkit from the Avengers back to Glasgow with me, and a chapter was duly forged in the home of the Glasgow Women's Library, an organisation that, as Kassandra mentioned, I co-founded a year earlier in 1991. So I've been sort of fueled by these impressions that helped to forge ideas about a queer feminist resource in Scotland, which you're all very welcome to visit if you if you are keen to do so. But in the intervening decades, I've continued to be active in cultural and countercultural work in lots of different registers. And over the past decade or so, I've been really increasingly interested in how radical organizing and movement work campaigning groups and countercultural institutions, how their institutional knowledge is safeguarded and is relayed as organisations evolve. Thinking about Soheil's introductory paper, I think this is a very vital terrain to be looking at, but particularly how ideas about leadership are vital in this work. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So Glasgow Women's Library and its precursor, Women in Profile, have their origins in the late 1980s. And I'm interested in how both and the organisations that I'm going to be speaking about in New York have managed to endure waves of challenge and have also sort of managed different degrees of risk and opportunity over that period. And they were forged, the Women's Library and the Women in Profile were forged as so many other equalities organisations have been, as Soheil really beautifully pointed out earlier, including CLAGS itself, through at the point where a critical mass of people have identified a deficit in the existing resources and have had particular types of senses of rage, passion, and determination to create places, spaces, and associated resources, as we all know. So, next slide, please. So, Glasgow Women's Library has grown from this sort of grassroots origin into a cultural institution, and this is again where I'd love to talk to Soheil more about this, maybe outside this forum. But it has this sort of like massive collection now, so it has over 1 million archive items, it has staff, and it has visitors locally and from around the world that love it, that use it, that own it. And we are part of that community, and those communities are part of our world. And they contribute enthusiastically to its development, and it's remained almost with its focus pulled on its original values. So it is quite an anomalous creature. It's not part of any bigger institution, and it doesn't have like a sole funder. For the last 30 years, as Kassandra's mentioned, it's been home to the National Lesbian Archive, and we've been growing and developing that resource within our wonderful organisation. In 2021, we celebrated like this 30-year milestone, and it gave us a sort of chance really to critically reflect and solicit criticism from others about the way that we work as feminists and as a wide community. So next slide, please. So I suppose a really strong strand in the braid of our programming and our work over that period since that anniversary has been sort of like really questioning what we've been doing, how we've been doing it, and thinking about these qualities in the ways of working that have enabled it to endure. And my own research focus has become, as I plan my own hopefully graceful exiting from this organisation, what type of leadership have I been involved with, and that sensing at the same time how this term leadership is really freighted with a lot of issues that are around leadership itself, about power itself, abuses of power, and orthodox forms of leadership. So, what are the forms of leadership that support endurance within hostile periods, but also that can maintain these authentic aims? So the literature on leadership of countercultural organisations, in particular feminist and queer ones, I think is incredibly sparse and fugitive. And it's fugitive within the records as well as, I suppose, those of us who've been dealing with the CLAGS resources and records show. And certainly in conversations that I have with people that I regard as leaders, people immediately want to disavow their own leadership agency. So it's actually a really difficult thing to do. But I want to grapple with it myself. I want to understand my own experience, and I want to do that through discussions with others who have been leading. And I've been writing a sort of manuscript about feminist leadership while I've been here. The scholarship has enabled me to explore leadership in relation to enduring feminist and queer projects here in New York, and really getting to grips with the resources and the ways that these organisations have been incubated, sustained, and safeguarded. And I'm really hoping that this could be a gift to fledgling and precarious organisations as we navigate these uncharted political, cultural, and social waters ahead. So the next image, please. So I've been involved in 4 strands of activity. I've been visiting fledgling and enduring equalities-focused organisations, as I've been describing, and asking questions about what are the qualities, what are the characteristics, what are the ways that these have been led, tracking the evidence of leadership approaches as they appear in the archival collections and in other records. And I've been interviewing queer and feminist elders, and also lots of fantastic younger cultural workers as well. And I've been writing and reflecting on leadership for this book project. So next slide, please. So who have I been meeting with? Well, lots of different people, including Lois Weaver, who is here on the floor with Peggy Shaw. And just really interested to sort of see how Lois and Peggy have been sort of like incubating projects over decades. So, for example, the Wow Theatre Cafe, which is still going, the Split Britches Theatre Company, which clearly is still doing fabulous work, as we can see here. But I've been also going along to the current care cafes that Lois has been deftly and beautifully hosting at La Mama. I also attended, the next slide I think shows this, the beautiful, poignant and gorgeous gathering of the 50th anniversary of the lesbian journal Sinister Wisdom. And I've also been meeting with some of these sort of like remarkable elders that circling around to the beginning of my talk I mentioned. So Adele, I've met with, who helped found the Lesbian Her Story Archives 50 odd years ago. And I'll be meeting with Joe Nessel online next week. And I'm here at the moment. In fact, let's go to the next slide. But yeah, I'm here at the moment at Radcliffe College, where I am going to be meeting with the archivist Patrice Green, who's just gathered the acquired the Barbara Smith archives, and is going to be introducing me to some of the correspondence between Barbara and Angela Davis and many others as well. And I suppose I just wanted to acknowledge as well that how beautiful it was to be at to see Alexis Pauline Gumbs speaking about Audre Lorde, and to be attending lots of beautiful events all over this remarkable city. And I'm going to be meeting with Sarah Schulman, who, again, just circling around to the start of this week contribution today, was one of the lesbians who set up the Lesbian Avengers project all those years ago, for which I'm incredibly grateful. And I suppose also, just very briefly, just to finish, yeah, I've just been traveling as well and seeing Time and Space Limited at Hudson and very many other remarkable enduring resources. So I want to just see what the alchemy is of how these remarkable places exist. So I welcome suggestions of other people to meet, visit, and of course your feedback, but want to extend my thanks to CLAGS and to Matt Brim, who I think is a remarkable feminist and queer leader in his own right. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adele. That was wonderful. We have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions for our final few fellows, I believe it was Matthew, PJ, Rose, and Adele. So if anyone has any questions for them, this is a great time to pose them, either in the chat or by raising your hands. Amazing. Well, I know that we are going to be hearing much more from these fellows and award recipients in the months to come. Maybe if any of the final four people that I mentioned wants to share anything about what you're hoping to work on or intentions that you have for this next year, this would be a great time to do that. Yeah, Adele.
Sadly, I'm only here for another 3 weeks, so it's going to be a real hell for leather dash to pack everything in. But I want to reiterate some of the things that people have been speaking about fondly about CLAGS, and just to sort of appreciate the context that we're working in, and just what an incredible luxury it is to be here and a privilege to be at this particular time in history. So I really would like to be continuing to be connected with the fellows that I've met virtually this evening, and to support CLAGS as I exit over the next 3 weeks.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's truly a remarkable cross-section of thinkers and disciplines and places that you're working with, materials that you're working with. But I do think that all of you are like actually do create a really interesting dialogue amongst yourselves that feels like exciting and appropriate. And as Adele is saying, very well suited to this particular moment. So thank you. Another shout out to our 2026-2027 award winners and fellows from this year. For those who are interested in attending upcoming CLAGS events, I strongly encourage everyone to attend the Munoz Award, which this year is going to Queen Jean. She's a remarkable, remarkable thinker, activist, community worker, and just presence in queer and trans communities. So if you're able to attend, that'll be on June 15th, Monday, June 15th. There are still tickets left, remarkably. It's a free event, but you do need to RSVP. And I can share the link to that in this chat. And then in addition to that, if you would like to attend the know about our upcoming events, you're more than welcome to join our mailing list. You can do that by going to the CLAGS website or by clicking this link, our constant contact form, and joining our mailing list there. And support CLAGS so that we can continue to support scholars like the ones that you saw today. Please go to clags.networkforgood.com and to contribute, because we are an underfunded and very precariously funded institute that is doing work for queer trans scholars. And the more support that we have, the more that we can support emerging thinkers and established thinkers like the ones that you've met today. Thank you again to our fellows and our award recipients. Thank you to the CLAGS staff who've supported with this event, to our ASL interpreters, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next CLAGS event. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Kassandra, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.